All right, well, welcome everyone to the July 1st SIG Architecture biweekly meeting. Had a relatively light agenda today, so had one item proposed around the K-log deprecation. Does anyone want to come forward and lead that discussion?
It says in the notes they can only attend the second half, so we may have to just punt it since we don't have a first half. I drank all the orange. I only drank half the orange juice. It was just the bottom half.
If we only have half a meeting, does that mean that I'm not going to say that? I was about to say a dad joke. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Making dad jokes when you don't have kids is a faux pas, just so you know.
Jordan,
Sorry, say that.
please stop that.
Dad jokes from people without kids. It's a faux pas. Anyway.
This is exactly
that's going in that.
4th of July
That's
week.
going in the museum, man.
I think we're all working for the weekend right now.
Weekend and code freeze. Yeah.
I have a topic I'll throw out. I have my the KEP on revising the meaning of status, which seems like most people are agreeing to at this point. It needs a final nod. There's a PR already out for changing the wording on the community repo. So it's not urgent, but it has been sitting for a long time.
Has there been any conflict?
It's really in the queue behind like code freeze blockers. So it has not fallen off my radar. I plan to get to it after Thursday. That's my plan.
Do you want to bump the thread and then maybe send a wider call? Because then that'll give us a nice window for comments before, after code.
Sounds good. So, my main concern is I'd like to give guidance to future API reviews based on that. So if as long as I'm confident that it's not completely torpedoed, then I'm good with that.
I was violently in favor and will be very, very argumentative with anybody who disagrees with you. So was there anyone who had any like significant objections who participated, but maybe hasn't commented on the KEP?
I think David Eads was the loudest opponent, and he wasn't even a complete opponent.
Just for the context for the recording and the meeting minutes, what KEP is this?
I knew somebody was going to ask me that. Let me get a number. Hold on.
2527.
2527, says Clayton. I don't know if he's right or not. Probably is.
Yeah.
Looks that way.
Thank you.
So Tim, I feel like this came out of some of the in-place resource resizing discussions around kubelet and checkpointing. The one thing that I guess I saw some discussion today in the Slack SIG API machinery channel is there was a period of time where I remember speculating with Clayton, maybe Daniel, a few folks on like the benefit of like a caching read-through proxy that could run co-local to kubelets, so that nodes that were disconnected may have been rebooted. They could have restarted their workload because they would have had at least that local previous checkpointing state that the kubelet would have seen from that maybe co-located API server. The only fear that I have on this stuff right now a little bit is is if there'll be any unintended consequence of a kubelet needing to write in order to start something in the future. But I'm not so strong on this that it's a negative.
So when we did the resource scheduling resource metrics KEP clarified some of like I was basically, it's like going back to pod safety. Like we've never really fully defined the guarantees we offer for pods. A couple of KEPs have come close. I actually did. We went through a little bit of a review saying the kubelet does not require that status be updated before starting a container in that, which is a summarization of our existing state. I'd be happy to go and firm that up in another cap or in a broader one. It's in the cap as like lays out the resource model and kind of defines the naming a little bit, but I think we could take it to another cap, maybe combine it with the volume one if we can get agreement on that. We don't require it today.
Yeah, and I think in the resource resizing flow, the kubelet could just restart something as they last saw it, even as it kept using it as a checkpoint. I was mostly just concerned if we ever get to a spot where I need to write in order to start something.
So
I don't think we should allow that to happen.
yeah, so
if
that's
it has
not
to be opt-in no matter what. There was a discussion last year on workloads that wanted to only, so it was basically another variation on fencing, which is if I lose the lease from the node, I don't want that workload to be running, which is a different kind of a guarantee than what we provide today on the API server level. We didn't actually formalize that or get that into the cap, but that's basically like, it's another form of fencing. Like if I haven't been able to report status, if I can't hold the lease, stop me and then start me again when you reacquire the lease. That would be a feature request down the road. But I don't think, again, that would be opt-in. There's no way that we could make that required because that would completely change the workload profile of every cluster in the world.
Okay.
I remember being on that call with you, Clayton, I think. And when you say opt-in, you mean like opt-in from the node side. So like the node knows it's going to shut down. So it's going to like put a fence or a condition or something that says like, I'm shutting down. Before I pick things back up, I will like remove the.
No, I was going to say on the workload side, like you would have to say that you tolerate this much API server connectivity loss from the node, like however we, like that's just, it's a mechanism, but like it's a workload specific thing. Like this workload is different from this node. You can't blanket change the behavior of workloads in queue without breaking behavior. We could let a node define it too. I was thinking more of the, you want to do this, just slap this on all the workloads that it matters, and then the rest of them will coast. Like CSI drivers, do they need that? Probably not.
yeah, so just a
So,
concrete
Tim,
example of
it looks
something.
like-
I'm sorry, Jordan.
Go ahead.
Concrete example that
No, no,
came up in SIGNode a few months ago was, I think, a particular SDN. If it's not Calico, I'm sorry, but I think Calico is what came to my mind, where there was some need to be able to read something from pod status during a pre-start hook or a post-start hook that the kubelet did not make any guarantees about writing back to. And so that those types of intersection points, I was a little concerned on if we have to start making guarantees on kubelets will make write backs somewhere in the normal pod startup lifecycle that would be problematic. But I still am happy with the resource resizing design and the loosening of the concept here. It was just a thing that we have to be careful about for other areas.
Jordan, did you want to continue? Sorry.
When you were saying like Derek, when you were saying writing before starting, the main place I had seen that was on the node status as like a fencing thing. So like before, if some central controller thinks this node has like lost its mind and has put a taint or a condition or something on it, says, all right, I'm like all your workloads are dead to me. I'm gonna go like whatever all your workloads. Like having you know, thinking forward to how the node on startup before it like starts rerunning API sourced pods, like does something to its own status to say like, hey, I'm alive, to make sure that it gets a conflict or observes like, oh, the central thing thought I was dead. Like that level of
that was the other part of the discussion we were having. I was thinking on the workload side, but you're right. That's the that's
like
the,
some sort of node level fencing or status or right. Like I think we already may do that. Like the kubelet already waits until it observes its own API labels and taints and stuff before it plays API sourced pods on startup.
On a kubelet restart, we did add that you have to go and ensure that we've reconciled node and pod. That was a very recent change, Jordan, that we fixed those bugs.
Yeah.
I will just say that, like, from my own interaction with the user communities we engage with, sometimes the confusion of, oh, kubelets keep coasting if they lose connection back to an API server and my workload's not disrupted, is easily then confused with, I had a power loss and I expect the function to still keep working in that local site when there was a network disruption. And that's a very unclear subtlety to a lot of people. And then what that has led to is folks potentially looking at running more single node or small or remote edge clusters where they don't have those network hops. But I wouldn't be surprised if the broader world is unaware of the fact that they would be potentially, vulnerable to this type of thing. And either way, it's fine as it is now. I'm just making you aware that others have been confused.
Derek, you're saying that somebody changed the config loop so that pods from the API server don't start until labels are read for the node?
Yeah, so we had a race condition, Jordan, fill me in where I'm lost, where the node hadn't reconciled its status object. And so that the locally understood labels or tolerations were not understood. So we had to make sure that on kubelet restart, the node informer has synced at least once when it's expecting to reestablish running the local workload.
Does that break static pods?
Now, static pods still keep running. That was a.
So this is specific to API to pods coming from the API source. So basically, before we start running pods from the API, we want to admit them based on node info, also from the API.
Yeah, I figured that's what it was. I just wanted to check.
Yeah. Tim, looking at your KEP, it looks like there are two main points. The one about status being durable and like dropping the, like, could we reproduce it from observation? I think that's totally in bounds. Like, we already do that all over the place. And like, we rely on that heavily in many, many, many places. That bit I think is totally fine. The like subdividing authentication or subdividing access to status, I think is a good question and something we should give guidance on. That, to me, that doesn't seem exactly the same. Like, I don't know if it belongs in the same one. If there's more content around that, I'd be happy to like split that out.
Is that an example? I mean, it's really more of an example. Not like we allow you to do this today. It would be an example of how you could use it. We're neither recommending nor blocking it. Is that what your concern is, Jordan? Like, you think we're?
Oh, I'm not. I don't know. I just hadn't thought through it yet. It's less clear to me than dropping the must be reproducible from observation.
Is there? Sorry, what specific language are you looking at? Can you just point me to line number?
71.
.2. Clarify when it makes sense to use two objects. So like RBAC granularity. Using status because of RBAC, like it gets into authorization examples, and I just wasn't sure.
Are you looking at the KEP or are you looking at the?
Yeah, I'm looking at your like P527, the PR.
Yeah, I was looking at 71, and I felt like 71. Oh, sorry, this is the, okay, never mind. This is the KEP, not the KEP.
The KEP, not the doc.
I linked to the line. Part one made a ton of sense to me. Part two, I'm not.
The paragraph up above on line 71 to me seemed pretty clear. Like, it's a description of what you can do. And so it's more of it's not like a normative thing. It's a advisory thing.
Okay.
But it is a little, like, we're not telling you have to do this. We're just saying, this is something that we do today in several places, and therefore we will not remove the ability to do that, or we have no, like, it's kind of weird thing is like, we've supported this the entire time. You can do sub-resource RBAC. Would we ever remove it? No, it's part of the V1 contract for RBAC. We just document that there's a pattern out there that people use in some cases.
So the meaning of paragraph 2 was simply to say, when I write the doc, maybe it makes more sense to actually look at the doc PR. which is this one. Too many windows. Where'd you guys go? There you are. I wrote, so the at line 1624 wrote a little bit about when it makes sense to use different patterns and what's been done in the past. It is not intended to be normative. It's just, these are your options and these are some of the trade-offs. And apparently there's a typo, appropriate. I'll have to fix that. So if you're concerned about it, I'm happy to split it up. It felt like they are part of the same conversation to me. When I have the conversation with people about don't use status for this, and yes, Derek, it did start with the in-place updates. It was like, well, we can't use status for that because the rules say, well, now the rules don't say, so here's when it's appropriate and when you might want to think about doing it differently.
Yeah. Okay. I don't really care how we update it. If like, I don't care about breaking things apart. You had said like, sounded like David maybe had an objection. I don't know if it was to that bit or to what. I was trying to streamline things that were not contentious. But
David's objection, I think, was mostly it's really nice when status is purely from observation, and I think we all agree that it is nice. It's just not always possible or reasonable to require it.
A good way to frame that might be like, if it is not a one-way thing from observation, you have to define what happens when the recorded status and the observation differ. Like if it's no longer purely flowing from observation, now you've got reconciliation of status and the real world, and you have to define like, and that gets into a per API thing, but
so
like the kubelet has this today with pod status, container status, right? Like it has sort of a monotonic state machine guarantee. Like I never transition from this state to that state. And so it has to deal with situations like, well, the status says this thing isn't running, but when I ask my container runtime, it says it is. So what now?
Well,
Yeah.
And the original goal of spec status was to separate like the primary author's intent from the realized outcome. There's nothing about realized outcome that means it doesn't have inertia or like there's an infinite amount of use cases. Spec and status are like, we divide the world into two parts where spec is what you're mostly dealing with and status is telling you how the outcome went. That's maybe a more important principle than status is fully recreatable. Like there's a clear ordering of importance. Like if you don't want either, just mix all your fields together and now you look like every Ruby API ever auto-generated from a database table. Why do we do spec and status? Because we wanted to clearly call out what humans or machines were operating on and the outcome of them. A nice property, just like idempotence is a nice property, is you can reconstruct it from state from nothing, but the real world is much more complicated than that.
If we keep talking for 7 more minutes, we will have a first half of the meeting. Just pointing that out.
So
just as a note, we actually we got things added as people were talking. So there are
awesome.
4 things on the list.
Cool. Let's stop on this. If people want to jump on the words in the KEP or in the PR, I'm happy to adapt. Or if everybody's happy with it, Jordan will eventually get around to approving it. But in the meantime, I'll start adjusting my guidance to APIs. Thank you all. I yield the floor to whoever's.
I'm just looking at the agenda. I don't think that the Klog person is here yet. So
Merrick's not here yet. I can go if you want me to go next.
No, we have conformance people who are here. So Rian can go right now.
Thanks, Kirsten. We had very light attendance of the conformance meeting this week. So if there's anybody that can give us some eyes on the 3 PRs that I've got for promotion, those will still get in for this release, which will take us to 17 new endpoints this release. They've done their 2 weeks on the test grid. They're ready to roll. And the nice thing is that will take us to 88% coverage of the apps endpoints with only 7 apps endpoints remaining, which we will be targeting in the next release. So that will take apps to 100%. So
I'll try to review those after the meeting. I'll
Thanks,
pull it up
Leighton.
now.
Thanks, Leighton. I really appreciate. And that is for conformance. Just a side note, there is one extra test with 2 endpoints for API machinery, which we dropped in the channel. It won't make it for test freeze this release, so we would appreciate some eyes on it at some stage to get it merged so we can get the test thread going, and it will be an early win for the next release. Thanks, Kirsten.
Sure. We have Alana up next, if you'd like to go.
Yeah, I just figured since the conformance folks were on the call, I might raise this one because this is something that we've been talking about in SIG node. So SIG node has some tests that are labeled node conformance. And I asked the question, how is a node conformance test different than a conformance test? They are very different. And the node conformance tests from Dim's explanation were that they were attempting to like provide sort of a conformance-esque test for the CRI. But a lot of people in Node have been trying to add like conformance tests or graduate various features, and then they come back and they ask, well, is it supposed to be a Node conformance? Is it a conformance? Like, which is it? So I think that we should maybe rename Node conformance to CRI conformance and add some docs, and just wanted to get people's takes on that. I see Hippie is giving me a thumbs up.
Alana, I linked to the original issue where we started this from Yuju in 2018. It predates even the CRI. It was really us trying to get a set of tests that would exercise more node local function without needing to have a full cluster. So a lot of like the C group validation testing was in there. Some huge page testing would go in there. The label doesn't have any particular meaning at this time, but it's definitely more expansive than the CRI.
Okay. I know that we've been wanting to at least try to clarify this, so I don't know if anyone else has thoughts.
I'd say once a release, at least, if not twice, we'll have someone popping in about nodes and jumping into the conformance group to try to at least a really clear sign along the road when people are working on CRI or node and those things, that just having the word conformance in there when it has such a strong connotation to the overall Kubernetes conformance, even though it's not a tag, it's not got the brackets around it. It's not, when you're first seeing all of this complex ecosystem of things, the word conformance definitely pops out much more clearly than any signpost along the road currently.
Yeah, this is super helpful context.
I've
Because
also
a lot
seen
of the
people
folks...
open issues.
Sorry?
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
This is helpful context because a lot of the folks who have been trying to figure out what we should do with the node conformance test don't have any of the history. So we're like, well, I don't know what this is for. Can we get rid of it? Can we rename it so it's more accurate? Should we write some docs for it? So this is all history that I like. For example, that original issue, I don't think anybody in the CI subgroup is familiar with that. So all great.
I was an archivist there, just like Jordan. So I want to be able to have the label. The one area where I do see some of this stuff being useful is I know we had an issue on like tests that we lack the infrastructure to test, but are still useful. So like with the one I just approved this week, the multi-page huge pages support. Like you're not going to get 1 gig huge pages in our test infrastructure, but like it is something that like if you look in the Google Doc, I think when Yuju had first written this, there was some concept of like a special feature that might be like infrastructure specific or hardware specific. And if anything, maybe we could go and vet the existing tests that have that label and see if we should think about reclassifying.
I've advocated in the past, and I'd like to continue to advocate that directionally, it would be super useful to get a distinct suite of tests that allow us to test things like 1 gig huge pages without turning on an entire cluster. Like it should be possible to have just a node-oriented E2E suite that just brings up a VM, runs kubelet on it, feeds it some static pods, and verifies that it does in fact program 1 gig huge pages correctly. Ditto for things like kube proxy. I can do all sorts of manipulations of kube proxy that really don't make sense in the, like, I don't need a whole cluster to turn them up for, and they're disruptive and et cetera. But we don't have that. So I would like that over time that we end up with our own batteries of tests, because I think kubelet and kube proxy are just intensive enough that that's useful.
Yeah, I mean, Node E2E is still a little opinionated. It gets tied into a lot of like, we never really quite clarified the assumptions it makes about the environment it runs in. So it works with a little bit of hacking on a fairly wide range of distros and environments. But we'd have to make some opinionated choices there. Kube proxy, I think, is a little bit easier, but I'm thinking about like various problems with IPVS and IP tables over the years from different versions would, I think I agree, Tim. Like, I felt the frustration of not being able to get Node E2E working in more environments. Needs some attention for sure.
Yeah, I mean, just like picking on kube proxy, you touched on one of the main points. Like, we don't really exercise all the different kube proxy modes. We sort of exercise the one that is the default, and we assume that the rest mostly work, and people are going to complain if it doesn't, right? It would be nice if it was easier for me to say, just bring up a machine that's running, that has this kernel installed and can run IPVS, and then I'll run all the tests in IPVS mode. Then throw away the machine and bring up a new machine, turn it on in IP tables mode, run the same battery of tests against it, without all the extra machinery of a cluster. Clearly, this isn't important enough for us to have worked on yet, but it is increasingly frustrating when I find stuff that doesn't work.
I don't know if anybody has anything else to add. Definitely this will all be useful to bring back to the Node CI subgroup. So and Merrick just joined. So I can wrap up my item. Thanks, everyone.
Cool. And I guess we'll get a brief update from Hippie. Hello?
Yes, thank you. I just noticed as I was reading the Kubernetes Community Annual Report that stuff from SIG architecture is mentioned a few times. And in particular, the community milestones, there's a list of them. And the first 3 are some really cool numbers. 100,000 issues and PRs, 50,000 contributors, and important to the work that my team works with, 75% of API endpoints. We finally got there, and I actually took time to take the picture and draw a line. That is some hard-earned work that made the news, and we should Ruhan open your favorite beverage to have a celebrate. Thank you for your support on that long-term important initiative for the community. Yay.
Yay.
Yay. Put a little more energy into it.
Yay.
That was like an E or yay.
It's 6 a.m. so I haven't had my coffee yet. I am jumping on the inside, and I wanted to make sure we pointed to the positive stuff here.
Thanks for the update. And thanks for being here so early. 6 a.m. is very early. I guess we can then move to Merrick. Are you here? Are you ready?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, cool.
I
Take it away.
hope, yeah, I hope that it didn't cause too much problem. Apparently, open source community like to meet on the exact same time every month. Yeah, so let me go into the topic. So I wanted to bring the one of the, let's say, smaller proposal proposal that started really small, but I think it's growing and possibly will need to help. But I wanted to get overall feedback on idea of introducing, let's say, major changes to flags or logging features that are provided on the Kubernetes components side. So here I meant the core components like API server, and scheduler, and controller manager. So overall, what I'm trying to solve is that over the time we have aggregated a lot of features in Klog, the Kubernetes logging library, and those features over time degraded in their quality and maybe lack of investment resulted in some features even like conflicting or flags being really confusing for the users. And currently, the problem is that the current state of Klog flags really blocks a further development for logging, for structured logging, which is especially introducing alternative logging formats. Here, JSON. So I wrote down a proposal to basically unblock the development of JSON and other future logging formats if needed, improve the quality of logging, and go take the flags that are implemented by Klog and make them standard flags in Kubernetes as all remaining flags in Kubernetes were migrated to new standard defined by working group component standard. Currently, the proposal, or I propose to remove the most of the flags, but I think the most impactful change is that removing the possibility of Kubernetes components to write logs to files. And there is some, I think this is a pretty big change that I think requires a discussion in this bigger in this bigger group, and so I wanted to get your feedback. The current reasoning is that the quality of the feature of like logging to files and lots of flags that are required to do it successfully, flexibly, and customizably for user is pretty big. So we have like 8 flags just dedicated to writing to logs, and this abundance of flags and features resulted in basically Klog maintainers giving up and deciding that they cannot support or use this flag in Kubernetes scale tests, and we basically wrote a wrapper that as an easier way to maintain it. So this is like my main argument, that if we are basically not using this feature ourselves and rewriting those parts of codes externally, maybe we should think about what we basically want to support in Kubernetes logging, and what we want to maybe give to community for them to customize it more. I don't think I want to take more. I just wanted to summarize this, to get your feedback, and maybe start the discussion if basically get information. Should it be a cap? How big a discussion we want? How to verify that we will not break users too much? And how to make this visible, basically, because this is a big change. We want to make sure that people know about this and have a chance to give their opinion. Yeah, that's all from me. If you happy to hear what you think.
So I don't think we ever intended for Klog to be a general purpose logging library, right? Like we never really wanted people to use it. So, but that's not reality.
Yeah, a
That's
lot
not
of people
super
are
helpful.
using Klog.
Yes, and it is our fault.
I would maybe go further to say, not only are a lot of people using Klog, but a lot of people are using those flags, at least from what I can tell, scrubbing bugs last week for Node. A lot of people are filing bugs about the various like logging to file things and how they expect them to behave versus how they actually behave and whatnot. I think they're used pretty widely in production right now for all the various components, at least for like, text format. So that's something to consider as well as far as deprecation goes. I imagine it would have to be like a many extended multi-release thing in order to deprecate those.
So for deprecating, I expect like, so what I propose not to make any differentiation and go through whole deprecation process of at least 3, maybe 4 releases to remove them and make, let people prepare. As for using the flags, I agree with the, I think the feedback, and I also seen issues that using Klog flags is really confusing because to maintain backward compatibility, we broke, or we didn't focus on clean design because we always wanted to maintain and were afraid of to remove anything. And this basically led to flags like log to STDR, also log to STDR, one output which basically changes all the behavior of previous flags. And I think we should.
So
the problem is that the problem is that we inherited glog as it existed, and we just never bothered to like subset that into a reasonable set of flags that we wanted to support. And now we're looking at it and saying, we shouldn't have done that.
So one of the things, I think DIMS had filed an issue talking about possibly doing like a V3 of Klog. Is that something that we could like schedule to coincide with this? Like, okay, V2, whatever, we're moving to V3. We're not going to support these flags anymore because we don't care about them. Like, do we have something open for, I think one of the issues is that we can't just like try to handle this internally in Kubernetes, given that there's a bunch of external people using Klog just as its own thing.
Yeah, the move to V2 was actually really hard. Like even moving to V2 meant going upstream to a lot of dependencies and helping them convert to V2, and then like simultaneously picking up all of those updates and switching ourselves to V2. And kind of at the time we said, this was terrible, never again. I can only imagine it is more pervasive and worse now than it was then. I can't imagine use has shrunk.
Let's also be clear, there's 2 separate issues. There's, should we remove these options from Klog and all the people who are using Klog for things other than Kubernetes itself? And there's, should we change the flags that you specify to Kube API server and Kube scheduler to remove those options? They can be 2 distinct conversations.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Clayton, did you have something?
I don't have anything productive. It's more the we're growing scope of our logging library, and we're not a project dedicated to running a logging. So like it might be good as part of this, like when we tighten, like if we tighten whatever decision we make, let's put a few bounds on what Klog is. The fact that our dependencies use it like requires us to effectively move an API through a large number of dependencies. That means that API needs to be pretty stable.
I mean, I think this proposal is to shrink the scope of it,
right?
To drop a lot of sort of the sprawl, at least from what we plumb through and expose in our components, even if we don't drop it from underlying Klog.
Right, and then there's the is it compatible? Like just Alana, like I was thinking about this from the perspective of like, is it compatible with our statement? And like I know that there's people in the ecosystem using it. Is it compatible with the goals that we have for logging in Kube and our dependencies? Is it responsible for us to couple that to a general purpose logging library? Is not, again, something that doesn't have to be coupled to this, but it does. As Tim, you were regretting whenever I hear regret from wise old engineers, I think, okay, let's put a little bit of a bumper on that so that we don't run into it again.
Yeah, I remember very clearly a conversation when we were forking glog to klog. Like, should we go through and just delete all the crap that we don't want to support? I'm like, oh, that's a lot of work, and it's really kind of subtle, and let's just not. And maybe we ought to have.
Yeah. So for V3 migration, I'm also like the proposal definitely tries to or work around the issue of touching klog and rolling out V3, because I expect more that at the point that we would want to make this decision, I would want to be more sure that we are migrating to Logger instead of and let community say that, oh, we are compatible and here ready implementation, you can already plug Logger into V2 and it works, instead of defining a new API and scoping. So basically, when we simplify, give the simplification back, but not try to roll out a totally new thing that is separate from V2.
Is it useful to start the process of, for the binaries that we produce, not for the library itself, but for the binaries that we produce, which uses the library, to restrict which flags we're willing to accept? Like, it doesn't need to be the entire subset of, it doesn't need to be the entire set of flags that Cube API server supports. So could we start by saying, we're going to remove the also logged to std error, and that's just going to become the default. And here's the migration plan for how to do that. Just from the Cube binaries. If you're using the library, you can go nuts and do whatever you want. That's your problem.
Yeah, so when I tried to removing them like that, basically I got to writing to files. Like basically log to stdr, also log to stdr. It's basically a workaround to, if you want to write to both files and stdr, and then all other flags are generated from this. Like you want to write to this file, but you want to also write different priorities or different verbosity to different files. This is all like we could basically try to untangle the mess, but I don't know if that's we will get, I know, much less pushback. Like if we remove, like if we just say if we remove all of them and say that here there is a, I know, that in the proposal is mentioned Go Runner, which is a proxy that Deems implemented to basically read the API server logs or other components and write them to file for our k-up test. If we just say here, like you can configure all those features in this binary if the same way. Instead of like having part of the API in the components and part of the API in the separate binary.
I mean, the thing I keep coming back to in my head is ultimately we chose glog with not a lot of consideration for alternatives. There weren't that many alternatives, but we chose it without much consideration. And then we just exposed all of the glog flags, and we're now carrying that forward forever. If we want to ever switch to something that isn't klog internally, that isn't the legacy glog style internally, we have to take ownership of those flags. So I'm not sure how to crack it. Like, we have deprecation policies around admin flags. Every flag is useful to somebody, but if we want to control this, we have to assert ownership at some point.
So do you mean like we would need to assert that ownership on the Go runner, or we would, or new flags when they pop up with?
More like the set of logging related flags to the cube binaries are owned by us, not by the Klog library. And we should expose only the flags that we want to expose in terms of the functionality that we know we need and we know we can justify. And everything else should in hindsight should have been in the future should be hidden so that we can adapt the logging libraries if we need to. Again, that doesn't help people who are using Klog for their own stuff, right? Or people who get Klog through a transitive dependency and then use those flags. But it does help us get control back of our binaries.
Yeah,
Maybe, but it's a painful process.
I think that's what the proposal was saying. Like, what are the logging flags we want on the core Kubernetes components? And starting basically from nothing and saying, what do we need? And so like verbosity, and then the bit that lets you say like turn up or down verbosity on particular files or components. Like those two, it proposes like we need these. And then everything else, it's like, do we want any of these? For me, the big divide is mostly between, do you give the ability to write to a file or not? Like, I can buy that like API server distinguishing between standard out and standard error is not particularly useful. Like having a single output stream from API server, I think is probably reasonable. So that cleans up a lot of cruft, like also log to standard error and like log at this verbosity to standard error. And there's a lot of weird flags around that that I think could go away. We could stop exposing through our components. Do you allow writing to a file or not? To me, that is the biggest open question.
And the distinction there, as opposed to just like using a redirect on the command line, if I remember, glog, klog will do some rotation itself, won't it?
Right. As soon as you allow writing to a file, you have to basically bake in rotation. Otherwise, you have created a disk full foot gun for people.
So we dependent for a long time on Kubernetes on log rotate. Like I know if that's like that's an option, but I agree that definitely someone will at some point start asking about log rotation if we expose.
I mean, the point is, if you only allow std out or std error, then you have to like log rotate. I think has an option to send a signal to the writing process that it's supposed to then close and reopen the output. But like, how do you close and reopen the output if you're redirecting to a file that you don't have a name for, right? So you fseek to the beginning. I get like every program has to code for that, which is just a disaster.
So I'm in favor of cutting down sprawl and exposing things that don't make sense. I think collapsing to a single output stream and deprecating the things that let you do standard out, standard error malarkey probably makes sense given normal deprecation timelines. I think trying to get feedback from people who are using the file output and thinking through like, if someone's using it today and we wanted to get rid of this, what would they have to do and to successfully write to a file and do the rotation and get signals back to us? Or like, what would we tell them to do and how reasonable is that?
So I'm totally not versed on the state of the art around this. I've been burned in the past and I try never to touch it again. Like, it worries me that the library tries to do its own rotation when, there are lots of external tools that have much more configurable policies around rotation. It feels like the right answer is don't do rotation in the library and instead say, this is how you let me know when it's time to rotate. And the library maybe does the seek to the beginning or whatever, but doesn't actually handle the rotation aspect.
So in terms of concrete steps forward, are we in agreement that if we split this proposal into like sort of two pieces, so piece one is stop using these flags in Kubernetes components. piece 2 is maybe get rid of them from Klog entirely. Are we in a position where we can say, yes, we want to get rid of the billion flags in Kubernetes components and go through the standard deprecation process to do that? And maybe for moving forward in Klog, we at least want to explore the potential of removing those down the road. Is that where we're at? Basically, I'm just wondering, how do we unblock like forward movement now because of the concerns with like how we get JSON logging up to par?
Like stuff in the Kubernetes components is where I think we should focus almost exclusively.
Yeah, that's. I'm saying it sounds like yes, we definitely want to do that, and then the like future of Klog is much more nebulous.
Yeah, I think my perspective is that we have like 6 flags around output stream weirdness. That seems like a good first place to focus and say, like, can we just say, if you're going to write to an output stream, this is how it works in Kubernetes components? And so the first piece is to say, like, internally, how would we configure Klog to do like a sane thing by default? And then say all the flags that you would have to set or could set related to that, like, we're going to deprecate those. Like that seems like a good first step to me. The second step is the file writing, rotation, signal investigation. Like, all right, the set of stuff around that, people who want to write the files and rotate them, how can they do that successfully? So cleaning up the output stream stuff as a first step, and then alternatives, or if, like Tim was saying, it seems like we will likely need to add some things to let Klog or the components work nicely with external log rotation solutions.
Or that stuff may be there. It may be there in the code, and we just don't know about it. We're not managing it properly. Like, the truth is, I mean, I don't know about you, Marek, but I'm certainly not an expert in the internals of glog and Klog. I used it and the published API, but I never really took it apart.
I did just before proposal. I read through some code, but it was still surprising for me what something that like flashing. Like I found that all Kubernetes components every 5 seconds do a disk sync. Like you sync up, like you should write your file logs. Let's sync whole file system. Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yes. I remember writing some of that at the beginning, like the flush at the end, and yes. So I think we have general support of like, yes, let's make it more sane. Yes, let's cut off everything that we can afford to cut off. I like Jordan's phrasing, like, let's figure out what is sane for Kubernetes components to do, and then move forward from that.
Okay. Yeah, I just want to get an idea, because on the proposal I proposed the fallback for file logging of using Go Runner, which is used currently by. Is this the same proposal to say for users that want to use writing to files? Hey, here is the thing that we use by Kubernetes main repo for it's scale test that it works. We definitely have an idea. It's a fallback.
I don't know. My recollection is Go Runner is mostly joining standard out and standard error to a single output stream. I don't think it did file stuff. And so the questions about like, how does this interface with rotators, and can you like send it a signal to make it reopen the file handle? Like, I don't know. So we would need to do that.
Yes. Okay. So but it's still like
diligence.
If we prepare and make a proper make it something that have a set of requirements for it, is it still same alternative? Like, is it a direct fallback that will allow us to move forward? If we have set of requirements and we fulfill it, we know how it behaves in those file rotation situations, and there is a documentation for users.
So
I think it could be. I don't know.
Okay.
It's unfortunate Dims isn't here. He was very involved in Go Runner and Klog and a lot of the work that went into that. So I'd probably defer to people who have more knowledge of that.
Okay. Maybe one last question. Should it be a cap? Should we like make it more official, or?
It's an API change in the strictest sense, command line, but yes.
I think this probably needs to be a cap because it involves multiple components that need to be coordinated on a change.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's all.
it's a good structure for gathering use cases and saying, like, if you're doing this today, this is what you should do. If you're doing this today, you should stop because it's bad, and here's why it's bad. And it's just a good touch point for getting feedback.
Okay, sounds good.
cool. So we're at time, and I don't think that there's anything else on the agenda, and people have disappeared. So I'm gonna stop recording unless there's anything else.
Sounds good.
Okay,
Thanks, Kirsten.